Welcome to another Bonsai Wire podcast. I'm Eric Schrader, and I'm here today with two members of the Bonsai Society of San Francisco.
Bernard Marque.
Hi, I'm David Scheltema.
And we're gonna talk a little bit about the past and present and future of maybe bonsai shows, bonsai growing in San Francisco, and such things. Bernard, let's start with you. You actually think that your backstory in terms of bonsai is very long and maybe not something that is common to other people. How did you get started?
I got started originally through a friend who was a landscape contractor, and he started putting extra trees in pots, growing them in pots. I would go over there, look at them, and think, oh, these are really nice. I like this. And then he would give me some extra trees, and I kind of emulated his technique. Neither of us knew what we were doing. And for years, we grew these trees in pots, clip and grow, never really having any sense of what is required to make really good bonsai. And either technically from a horticultural standpoint or from a design standpoint. And one day we went over to the garden at Lake Merritt, and I walked in and I saw these beautifully styled trees, and I thought, this is bonsai, not what I've been doing. And I asked somebody there, probably one of the docents, how do you go about learning how to do this? And he said, well, where do you live? And it turned out that I lived very close to the Bonsai Society of San Francisco. And I went to a meeting there, and they were doing some kind of presentation, and I thought, wow, these are fussy people. And
that drew you in?
It didn't take, no, I was kind of like this aversion, because bonsai has this reputation for being like overly controlled. And so I thought, oh, these are really fussy people. But I kept going to the meetings, and I started appreciating the reasons for why these people put so much attention into details. And I joined the club and kind of floundered, would bring trees in that I'd had for years. People would look at it and make little comments and suggestions, but I never felt I was making any kind of progress.
So what year, like if you remember,
this was 2006.
No, go back a little bit further. What year was it when you and Oliver started?
Oh, I think it was at least 10 to 15 years before that. So
around 1980?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's safe to say that you're 40 plus years into this whole thing?
Yeah, after having realized what is involved in doing real bonsai, I don't consider, those are kind of the lost years, the years spent wandering in the desert, the desert. And as it turned out, I had all these trees that, were quasi bonsai. Today I have, I think, 2 left in my garden. One is a gorilla palm, which is still not a bonsai, but it's kind of fun to see it growing in a pot. And the other one was a Washington hawthorn forest that originally was dug up by my friend in somebody's yard, the little seedlings, and we put together these forest plantings. And
so out of everything in your yard right now, the Washington hawthorn, as far as I don't even know what palm you're talking about. So as far as bonsai species is concerned,
it's the beloved one, Eric.
It's the one everyone walks past that does bonsai. Right?
Yeah. So, but the Washington hawthorn is the one that you had the longest.
Yes, and it's gone through so many iterations. The most recent was probably maybe 8 years ago. And it's vastly different than, what it was when I originally started it or even had it developed for many years.
Yeah.
We can get into that later.
David, how did you, what's your origin story? If you're a bonsai superhero, how did you get your superpowers?
Well, the world was shut down, and it was during the COVID-19 lockdowns, and I needed something to do that I could do from home, and I had been growing jades just casually, as I think a lot of people do, because they're kind of bomb-proof, and I wasn't trying to do bonsai with them, and I was having fun and, clipping here and seeing how the plant changed, and I thought that was really interesting, and kind of wanted a more of a challenge. And so I started just watching a lot of different videos online and kind of getting it, but lacking that actual tactile experience and the direct feedback of working with someone. And so I didn't get very far. I hacked up a lot of nursery trees. Probably still do, but I'd like to think at least I don't. Yeah. But then I started taking workshops and going to auctions and just really getting more familiar with the art form. And for me right now, as I'm only in year 3 or 4 of trying this out, it's really for me about the horticulture and trying to make my plants as strong as possible so that I can do all the cool artistic techniques. And so that's kind of where I am.
So when you say jade, was it Crassula ovata, the regular jade type?
Yeah, it was the regular jade. And so, I let them grow huge and then do extreme cutbacks and watch as the plant didn't die and be amazed with that. And of course the leaves, well, they're not really leaves, but they would reduce, and that was interesting. And but it also it's not like you're wiring a jade. I know you can, but it's a different experience because it's a succulent, and I wanted to just try some of the things I saw on videos with trees. So that's really what kind of got me into it.
Videos like YouTube stuff?
Yeah, like YouTube stuff. I mean, Eric, you were obviously a big influence on me getting into it, and then I realized that we both live in San Francisco, and so I called you up and asked if you could help me with my cotton Easter and didn't get a call back, but now I understand why.
Cotton Easter.
Yeah. Now I know it's pronounced Cotoneaster, and I've really advanced my game.
If you ask Google how to pronounce that word, it says that cotton Easter is the American pronunciation and Cotoneaster is the British pronunciation.
That is true. I've since picked up an entire volume on Cotoneasters that was given away for free at the botanical gardens. And there's some etymology of why and all this, but you just have to remember there's one T, not two.
I think I'm going to have to report whoever's giving away botanical garden books, especially Cotoneaster themed ones. We're going to have to report that to the city.
I mean, it's a whole volume, and inside it says free and discarded, so I'm in the clear.
All right. So both of you, so I live on the eastern half of San Francisco, which is the sunny half, so to speak. And you both live, David, you live in the Presidio, and Bernard, you live on the avenues here in the outer Sunset District, right?
Which is a misnomer.
It's because you never get to see the sunset.
Right.
So I think that it's an interesting topic to explore since both of you are here. That kind of the coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco concept is a real struggle for not just for you two, but for me a little bit to a little lesser extent. Bernard, how has it shaped your collection, maybe?
Well, first I want to say I'm looking forward to global warming. Because I think eventually I have ideal climate for growing bonsai. What it shaped was a lot of the trees that just struggled and took forever to develop. I just got rid of. They either died off or I came to the conclusion that it was just the wrong climate to grow these in. So I was left with only really a few types of trees, mostly conifers. Junipers did well, Japanese black pine. And I have to say, though, that despite them doing well here, I'm sure that if I lived in warmer climate, they would do even better or much better. So it is a struggle. It's a constant challenge to try to keep these trees healthy. And over the years, I always prided myself initially with my horticultural ability to keep plants healthy. I mean, it's no mystery. You water them, you fertilize them, you repot them occasionally, and more than likely your trees will thrive. Well, I found out after a few years of struggling and having some really nice trees that I'd spent many years working on die on me that it's a lot harder to do out here. And I think in general that's true, but I think even more so in this type of climate. where it's more, fungus infections and that type of thing are more easily, growing out here in this type of weather.
Do you have a particular tree that you think back on when you think of loss?
Well, I have many trees, unfortunately.
I thought we were keeping this positive.
But initially, I had a Korean hornbeam that I bought up at a bonsai nursery and developed over the years. It was part of my pre-club trees that happened just to develop nicely, given my limited, understanding of bonsai. I took it to a workshop with Marque in Vernice, and he helped me develop it and wire it out, and it really was a nice tree. And incidentally, that was when I first you were in the club before me for a few years, but I never trusted you because your reaction to everything was just cut it in half and develop the branching.
I'm definitely not trustworthy.
In retrospect, you were right. I realize you were right with a lot of your comments, but at the time I finished this tree and you said, that's really a nice tree, but it's in the wrong pot, which I actually knew enough at that point to recognize. And I said, that's fine, but I really don't have a pot. I've been looking. It's not that easy to find just the right pot for your tree. So you said, I might have something for you. You invited me to your house. You had a pot that you threw for yourself that you weren't using. You offered to let me borrow it. And I said, well, it's going to be like a year before I can get it back to you. And you said, that's okay.
I think that's my sense of attachment to things that I made myself.
Yeah. No, it was a right pot, for the tree. Anyway, to answer your question, one spring it set buds, it never budded out, and it just died. And I did the same thing to it year after year. It thrived, and suddenly it died. I
remember it was not right after you had repotted it either.
No. And it's still inexplicable to me. There's always a reason why something happens to your trees, and the challenge is to be able to identify what it was. And I think in retrospect, it was probably some viral infection of the roots. There was no evidence of insects or, mildew or anything like that. But it was really perplexing.
Well, it's interesting because you actually have another hornbeam now that you got from your same friend more recently than your original trees. And I was over here the other day and you said that it's like one of the most vigorous trees in the yard.
Growing gangbusters. But I think that's the big horticultural challenge in bonsai is being able to recognize why things are happening, be able to identify the problems. And I'm not a scientist, so it's really hard to figure out when trees start looking unhealthy what the problem is, unless it's something really obvious, like where you see insects covering it or something like that. So
I think a lot of people are familiar with summer dormancy as a result of hot conditions, but I think what both of you are dealing with, and me to a slightly lesser extent, is basically a summer dormancy as a result of cold conditions. And we see that the symptoms in the leaves and the symptoms in the trees is basically they're sort of like they think it's fall based on the weather, but the daylight length for some trees is more important. So they know that it's actually not fall. It's still midsummer. It's just that it's so cold, and they're not mountain trees, so they're not adapted to it. David, have you like sort of divided your collection into things that don't mind the summer weather and things that do?
Yeah, and I should say that San Francisco, for folks who aren't local, is 7 miles by 7 miles. We all three of us live within that. And I live probably about 3 miles from Bernard, and my conditions are a lot different. And so one of the struggles of just bonsai in San Francisco is the microclimates. And when I moved out here, I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. It's just some gimmick for the weather, the Weather Channel. But I really found that to be the case, that about 2 weeks ago, all my maples that were looking great suddenly started to shrivel and looked like they had been roasted in the sun. And yet there was no sun that had roasted them. So trying to figure out if that's the fog coming in and cooling down and just confusing the trees. The larches that I have are also, they were going great for quite a while. And then maybe about a month ago, they started to look like they wanted to drop leaves. And that was about the time that we will have warm temperatures in the daytime. When I say warm, it's in the 70s or so. And then at night, it will just drop precipitously, and we'll get just a cold wind with a lot of fog. And
so low, like it's typically low 50s at my house.
Yeah, it's low 50s as well where I am. And I get a real strong coastal gust that, I think it just confuses the trees because they're not, I don't look around my house and see larch, right? I don't see Japanese maple. So I think one of the real things for me being newer into this is to look to someone like Bernard, who has a lot of experience growing in the conditions that are as close to me as I can find, and really following what trees he's had success with, because you can't out horticulture Mother Nature, and if you try, it's just a losing game.
So what do you think some of the most successful ones that you have so far are?
Well, redwoods are obviously pretty good out here. I think junipers tolerate the spray and the fog. I know that I can't necessarily do things like air layer very well because I don't have the high heat, but the foliage looks great, and so I don't air layer. That's fine. I think some of it is accepting what you can and can't do within the parameters that you can't change. And you can't change the weather. Well, even though we're trying hard, you just need to work within what works best in your area. And I think that's a lesson that people either learn early and accept, or they try and fight for a very long time. And that's a losing fight.
If you had to pick so let's see, you started a pandemic. Yeah. So you're about 4 years into this whole thing. If you had to pick just one species that you were allowed to grow from now until the end of time, what would it be? Assuming that you stay in the same place.
Right. The species I didn't mention was Zelkova, and I've had a lot of success with them. And I think that there are enough sort of stylistic differences or design differences with that species that I think that would be the one I would stick with, as compared to, say, redwood, right? I think there's sort of two approaches to redwood that I've seen. One is the telephone pole, let's mimic nature, and the other is let's collect Yamadori redwood and look at this awesome root structure and let's call it Nabari and make something wild and crazy.
The burl formation.
The burl formations, yeah. And while that's interesting, both forms are interesting, I think that's a little bit more limiting in a species. So I wouldn't pick redwood. I think Zelkova is probably.
So brooms and forests and whatnot.
Yeah, and I think there's some cool techniques that Eric, you and I tried the. I guess the technique that's done in Japan of almost mummifying the Zelkova in winter.
Yeah.
And the idea there is that you get more acute branch angles and that you don't have to wire, so there's no risk of scarring. And I think there are a lot of things that are interesting to try and to watch. And I don't know that redwoods have as much of a history because they're not something you see in Japanese bonsai.
Right. Yeah.
So there aren't these interesting techniques that someone tried 50 years ago and has been refined over the decades. So I've come around to junipers. I think that they're definitely cool. I like that you can carve them. I just I'm a guy who plants seeds, And so for me, it's interesting to see Zelkova forests really emerge from seeds and start to grow that way. And I think I'm in the minority there, but if that's your thing in bonsai, you should pursue it. I think that there's no wrong, well, there are wrong ways to do it, but you should follow your passion. That's, I think, my advice.
So you think you're going to be a propagator at heart for your entire bonsai career?
No, I don't think so. But I think it's an important window into the horticulture, right? And I think it's something that a lot of people in bonsai that I've observed will enter it by spending money to save time. And that makes a lot of sense, right? No one necessarily wants to start with seed. But I think there's some really interesting things you can learn about growing, and you can always make the first turn if you grow. Eric's looking at me suspiciously here, as he's probably one of the largest growing operations that I'm aware of. And so I think maybe that's part of the reason that I'm interested in it, is because I really see what working with very young material can
I've roped you in.
Can do. Yeah.
You got to get them young. That's
right. Yeah. So I'm a farmer first. Is that, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So, Bernard, you mentioned that you've sort of like naturally dwindled your collection down to a certain variety of species. We've talked a little bit about hawthorn. David was talking about Zelkova. I think you only have one Zelkova. I think for people in other climates, so like if you think about coastal California, it's not a climate that is in common with a lot of other places. And so it's a Mediterranean climate, generally speaking, but then the coastal scrub in California probably is not that common. Maybe a few places in Australia and a few places in Spain or Italy or something like that is what we're talking about here. And then south to the Los Angeles area, if you're literally hanging on a cliff over the ocean, and northward, maybe into Oregon and Washington. I'm actually not sure, because I think the climate's a little bit different.
You're talking about the California floral province, Eric, and that you've described it perfectly. It does sort of bleed into those other states, and I think that it's very unique, right? The redwoods only grow in these coastal belts. There's manzanita. There's only certain manzanita will grow here. There's one in the Presidio that happens to be the only one that exists in the world. There's no other place that can support the growing conditions. Obviously California has ceanothus, which we don't really use in bonsai, but that's a plant that just is nowhere. That I grew up in the Midwest, and that's just, we don't have that.
Yeah, I think a lot of those natives are kind of unexplored, because if you go try to dig up the wild specimens, whether it's, on well, hopefully with permission from a private landowner,
of course with permission.
Most of them don't survive. So I actually know, Tim Kong, longtime member of the Bonsai Society San Francisco, did a lot of collecting locally, and he was not successful with ceanothus, and nobody's really been successful with manzanita. I mean, you can collect them, but they don't stay alive for very long.
Yeah.
But I think where I was going with the question for Bernard was actually the bonsai species that we've the exotic species that we've sort of adapted to this climate didn't occur here naturally. Black pine actually has been one of your go-tos. I think I may have inflicted that on you somewhat accidentally, but maybe to both of our benefit.
Right. Just to backtrack a second, you're talking about ceanothus and some of the natives. I tried that. I thought, oh, cool, why not use native species? But what I found is not all plants are conducive to growing in pot culture.
Right. Yeah.
So ceanothus, I tried to grow as an accent plant. I thought that would be an appropriate plant to have, say, with a redwood tree. And it never really did well. I had it growing for years, but every year it kind of lost branches and got smaller and smaller. So anyway, that's in answer to that question. So you did start, I think it was your second or third time propagating Japanese black pine seedlings, and you had a whole pot full of them. You took as many as you wanted, and you said, "Help yourself." And I thought, "Oh, little seedlings are
How times
like,
have changed.
and they were like an inch high, small little seedlings." And I thought, "Oh, that's great. I'll grow some of these." And I put them in 4-inch pots, and they were very manageable. And now it's 18 years later, and many of them, all of them, have developed really beautifully. Different styles, different designs. I had 2 of them in the last Pacific Bonsai Expo.
So 18 years from seed, was it?
18 years from seed.
From seed to high level shows.
Yeah.
I'm putting a calendar reminder in for my black pine seedlings.
You're on schedule?
We're not off schedule yet.
But I found they do really well. And I was thinking, when you asked the question, if you were limited to one type of tree that you could grow, the 2 types of trees that do well here are Shimpaku and Japanese black pine. Japanese black pine develop much quicker. The process is just the trees grow at a much faster rate, so it's a little bit more rewarding. And I guess if I was forced to limit myself, I would stick with Japanese black pine.
I'd like to change my answer. I also grow Japanese black pine, and they are fun. I think it's, yeah.
You're in the
am I headed for trouble with Zelkova, guys? Or?
Well, we'll come back to that maybe in a second. Hold on.
Boy.
So you're in the 3rd year with your oldest ones?
3rd, 4th year, somewhere in there. Yeah.
There's this middle kind of teenage phase that gets a little bit all of a sudden you have and it's not a 14-year-old boy, my son is 14 right now and he's as tall as I am. So you get these 6-year-old black pines that are as big as you are, and you're just like, wait a minute, I thought I was growing a bonsai. And,
right.
And I'm standing there nodding at you yes, you're growing a bonsai. All that's you're cutting all of that off later. You just need to make space for it now.
Yeah, I didn't realize I was shading out my house when I started to grow shohin.
So Bernard, you having gone all the way from the seedling stage to, people who know my business know that I actually did an e-course on this topic. It's specific to shohin, but you've done a bunch of different styles all the way from that seedling stage, and 2 of them in the 2022 Expo. What do you think? Is there anything that you would do differently in retrospect if you started over again?
I think that what I would do, the big challenge, I think I got 20 to 25 seedlings from you, and at the point where we were wiring the trunks, trying to develop different styles, the challenge was, how do we make different types of trees so they're not all the same type of tree? And I think 4 of them I made exposed root, and the others were more informal, upright, but different styles, different shapes to the trunk. I allowed a sacrifice after about the 4th or 5th year. I think I allowed a major sacrifice branch to develop, and I grew those out for probably 6 years or more, so that they got really big. And I think the mistake that was made at that time was not cutting them back and restarting. I think the idea was just let it grow. If I cut the sacrifice branch off, it's going to slow down the trunk development. So we allowed that to do, but at the expense of developing more taper.
So do you think in retrospect so I don't know how to quite describe it, but I think from my perspective, we left too much of the wired portion, and we should have cut lower to start a second section of trunk.
Yeah, to
so
get
that
more
you have more
classic
taper. Yeah,
classic taper. I am developing taper, but it's towards the trail end of the trunk.
It's kind of fascinating when you think about it. So, the 2 trees that you showed in 2022 were both exposed root. And one of the things that exposed root can do more quickly it takes a little while to get the exposed root going as opposed to just an informal upright. But one of the things that they can do more quickly is to create the appearance of taper, because the root mass becomes the trunk.
Exactly.
So do you find that you like those trees a little bit better?
I can't say that I like them better. It's like, which of your children do you like best? I've invested so much time into all of these trees. Obviously, some turned out better than others. But the exposed root is almost, when done right, is almost a guarantee of getting some kind of an interesting result. The informal upright is a little bit more challenging, but I'm excited. Part of my involvement in bonsai my big involvement is the transition of the development of the trees. And when you start making these changes and you start seeing it, for the first few years, it was developing the trunk and the branches were kind of incidental. And now I'm at a kind of that phase where I'm developing the branching and the trees are beginning to look like bonsai. So I'm excited about the prospect of what ultimately I can do with some of the informal uprights. And many of them are pretty interesting. Some are more classical Japanese styling. Some are a little bit more wonky. That's going to be interesting to see what I can make with those.
There's definitely some trunk shapes that we made where I look back. Well, looking at it now, you just kind of think to yourself, well, that doesn't really look like any sort of classical shaped black pine that I've ever seen. So what are we going to do with this? And it's been a little bit of a challenge, but it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
To look at the different shapes.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about growing conditions as a restriction or an enabler of certain design styles, but it makes a lot of sense.
Well, actually, what do you mean by that?
Well, so Bernard was talking about exposed root as sort of a surefire way to get taper if you can do the exposing of the roots, and so that being a path to success. Whereas he was suggesting that informal uprights are, and Bernard, jump in here. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
you could develop a exposed root black pine quicker than you can an informal upright tree.
Because the taper comes from the transition of the roots going into the trunk. Once you get to about, say, like an 1.5 or 2 inch trunk, you're not ground growing even to get to that point. You might have 4, 5, 6 inches worth of root girth. And so it gives you that appearance of taper that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. So are you going to see if you can apply that to Zelkova?
I'm in my forest era right now, okay. But there's no reason I can't start exposing some roots. I've got some seedlings. Start trying it out. When do you start? We're all seed growing folks here. When do you start thinking about exposing the roots when you're growing from seed? Is it?
I have a fuzzy time in terms of the timeline. I thought it was about year 3.
Yeah, with black pine at least, I think that if you take a 2-year-old and you are just sort of growing it out to create that second year's growth, at the end of year 2, you still have enough flexibility in the trunk to give it some good movement and enough wood in the roots, at least to give you a start. Because 1-year-olds tend to be just so floppy. It's like a piece of cooked spaghetti. It's so small. And then once you get past year 3, the base of the trunk, depending on the vigor of the tree, can be so large or big enough that it becomes difficult to get sharp turns in it. So depending on the size of the curves you want and whatnot, the second year seems to be the good compromise.
Well, it sounds like I have about a year to wait for the seedlings then.
So Bernard, back to your 2 exposed root pines. Talk a little bit about the experience of sort of the last 6 months, like once you found out that they were accepted into the 2022 Expo, what you had to go through in order to get all of the display elements ready?
Oh, the whole display. It was, well, I've had limited experience with exhibiting my trees, show trees, and mostly club shows. And those club shows, you tend to borrow stands from people, accent plants. This was on a whole other level. And I originally submitted, I don't know how many trees, 3 of my trees got into the last expo. And it took months to find the right stands, the right accents. It was a big challenge. Had I known how involved it was, how excruciating difficult it is to get all the elements just right, I probably would have withdrawn some of my trees or limited
No, we
it.
couldn't have that.
Limit it. I mean, I was very happy that the trees were acknowledged as being worthy of being in the exhibit, but it was an area that I did not have the level of the background to really pull it off completely on my own. And even in retrospect, after the show, I thought, well, there was things I would have done differently or I could have improved upon. So I appreciate the aesthetics and the discipline required to do it. I have to say that my main involvement with bonsai is still just being in my garden, developing the trees.
You're a grower at heart.
I'm a grower. I guess you're either a grower or a shower. And I still enjoy that. I mean, that to me is where the major excitement in bonsai takes place.
So as a grower, you've kind of gotten to the point where for this year's expo, you have one tree in that we've been touching up in the last month or so and working on the display for, but you're also going to be vending this year, right?
Right. Well, part of that is based on I'm getting older. My trees are developing. We talked about black pines. Every year, the work becomes double of what it was the previous year. Just a lot more work. And given the number of trees that I have, I thought I need to be sensible and limit how many trees I have. So with your assistance, we went through my collection and decided which were duplicates, which trees are duplicates, which trees I should be pursue, and which trees I should put up for sale. So I decided this year to be a vendor at the expo.
I think David's going to be like walking out into the garden after we're done recording.
Yeah,
going like, wait, which ones of these are for sale?
Yeah, this year I will be attending as a attendee and a buyer. So perhaps I'll run into some of those trees.
Yeah, I mean, the expo I think will be a great place for people to buy material. Hopefully, it will not be a complete madhouse in terms of shopping on Saturday morning, people elbowing and like smacking other people in the face to get to Bernard's trees.
Well, also, some of the trees that I'm putting out there, one in particular is a tree that I worked with, also with Marque in Vernisi. It's I guess it's a Procumbens juniper, and I've shown it already. It's a tree that is ready to show. I mean, it doesn't take any more development. All you have to do is refine the wiring maybe a little bit, but the tree is ready to show. It's in a pot that is a very nice pot. So somebody could potentially buy that tree and put it in a show, the following year.
So that's not a trunk that you developed. Where before you worked on it with Marco, what was the source of the trunk? Do you remember?
That was a tree that belonged to my landscaper friend. And I believe it was started, he got it from somebody who had started it as a bonsai. So it was already on its way, but it was so overgrown. And I remember bringing it to the club. I said, can I borrow this and see if I can refine it? And I brought it to the club and people had suggestions, but it was really not clear as to where this tree should be going. And I took it to a workshop with Marco. I think it was my very first one. And it was also the one that really converted me into a serious bonsai practitioner as well. After that experience, it was very inspiring. And I had several trees. Marco said, pick that. He said, work on this one, which happened to be the procumbens. And he had me wire it like for, I don't know, 6-7 hours until I was blue in the face. You know, am I done yet? No, wire the tip on this one. And then finally, towards the end of the workshop, he says, okay, now sit down and watch. And he starts bending the branches.
Yeah.
And my jaw dropped. I said, this is a bonsai. This looked like an old tree. And it was still in very early development, you know, very early phase. I mean, it's much more filled in at this point, but it was clear that this was, so it inspired me. I realized that, you know, what it takes to do really good bonsai. And he had the talent and the creativity to see that and to bring it out of that tree. So that's really what got me hooked. I mean, he really got me hooked with bonsai at that point.
So was that your first exposure to like having or watching someone kind of use wire to shape a conifer?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, when we started off, I think he had me doing some shari work initially on the trunk and said, do you know how to do this? I said, kind of. And so, you know, he showed me what to do. He took out a Sharpie and showed me where to carve, had me do that. And he said, do you know how to wire? And I said, well, kind of. I was just very new to it. And so he says, okay, wire this branch to this branch. And then a few minutes later, he came back and he said, oh, that looks like shit. Cut that off. And here's how you wire. So that's got me started on wiring. And then he said, okay, now do this branch to this branch. And then it was hours and hours of doing that and coming back for more criticism about my wiring technique and redoing stuff. And that's at the end of the session, that's when he moved the branches around. And again, it was just very inspiring to see the result.
So in a way, I mean, you were kind of tuned up. So Marco was brought in by the Bonsai Society and
Right.
and you elected to take the workshop. So kudos for actually electing to take the workshop, because at that point, if you hadn't seen somebody wire you, I can't imagine that you even knew what was going to happen. But so from a support perspective, it sounds like the club really had a very kind of defining role in moving you from somebody who just had maybe something that was a potted tree to someone who was a serious bonsai practitioner.
Right. Absolutely. Without having the experience of the club and the exposure to good bonsai, I wouldn't have been able to develop in the ways that I have. And I have to say, throughout my, not a career, but throughout my time doing bonsai, I've taken workshops with various people, and it's always been very inspiring to see people at a level beyond myself, what they're capable of achieving with material. And that includes working with you. I mean, I started working with you pretty seriously after one of my workshops, again with Marco. I think it was that hornbeam. And you know, I recognize in you the same kind of talent and creativity that I saw with Marco, where you could look at a tree, be analytic, consider the different options that you have to develop these trees. And that's always been a big source of inspiration for me. And my collection has reflects that, my experience with, your guidance.
Well, it's interesting that the different sort of paths in terms of club activity that, like, I was in the San Francisco group and I was also in BIB, and the exposure that I was getting to display practice and whatnot all came from BIB, because we would have displays, show and tell type displays at the BSSF meetings, but not with the intention of actually teaching people display. But the San Francisco group really stepped up, from the beginning to the end for you, I think, because if I call the 2022 Expo the result, you actually ended up borrowing stands from other members of the club. And So it was a kind of nurturing
Well, it was that whole
environment.
thing. It takes a community and stuff, and that's very true. I mean, I borrowed, accent trees from two different people, stands from various people who were all very generous and enthusiastic. Of helping me out to create my display. So unquestionably, being in a club enhances your ability to, well, it helps to motivate. It encourages you. It helps to set a standard for you. And then there's just the camaraderie of being in a club. I mean, there's people in the club that do serious bonsai. There's other people in the club that enjoy bonsai but don't really practice it regularly, but they're very enthusiastic about it. And I enjoy that aspect of it, that, the people are in, their involvement is, they have different reasons for their involvement, but they're all very enthusiastic about bonsai.
So, David, I think that segues perfectly into you having been sucked into being, what's your current position?
Vice president.
So you're currently organizing people like Marco. You're currently organizing herding cats to get them in front of people like Marco.
Yeah, and I think what Bernard was touching on is a lot of it comes down to exposing or exposure to bring people together who are very focused on, maybe one particular aspect of bonsai, and to bring professionals in to provide other perspectives and show off their creativity and really expand what when you look at a tree you see. And so I think my involvement in the club has really been, it's the best way I can get personal exposure to things that I'm not familiar with, that is personal and direct. And videos are great, but they don't tell the whole story. It's not three-dimensional. And I think to actually see, like you were saying, Bernard, about seeing Marco actually take something that you had worked on, make a few changes, and there's something sort of magical about that. It's like, wait, I was close, but I was miles off. I think that's the experience that clubs can really provide for people, and at all stages that can be the catalyst for taking your bonsai to a different level.
So before we started taping, we were having a little bit of a kind of logistical discussion between the three of us, because today's Wednesday and tomorrow is the monthly BSSF meeting.
Yes.
and we have a special guest coming in.
Yeah, we have a professional from Southern California, Julian Tsai, coming in, and we have, the club has a redwood. So I should back up. There are all these things that you think about in a club as a board member or as just an attendee, and the behind the scenes work of a club is big. You've got to find a professional, schedule them. Then you've got to find material. Then you've got to find the consumables like wire or, tools, or, even direction for what they want to work on. And so curating that is in itself kind of this exploration of what all the different avenues of bonsai. And my personal perspective is that I want to put the professional who shows up in a position where they can go any direction that their creativity takes them. And so you almost have to have all the things there. And I don't want to limit the presentation to just be what I think is possible. I want to make sure that I provide a platform for the professional or for the club member who's showing off their tree in a show and tell, to get the most out of that experience and share the most sort of unique perspectives that they have that you can't get anywhere else but that one experience.
So you also mentioned that you have a lineup of two other people coming up that are.
We have Adam Toth, who is another professional who I think he fairly recently came back from his apprenticeship in Japan. And he's going to be helping the club. I really love this idea. He's really into shohin, which is near and dear to my heart as an apartment dweller and someone who can't have board feet of bonsai. He's going to be having club members bring their trees in and talking about what he would do if the tree were his and how he sees the development progressing on the material. And I think that's really exciting because that's, demos are great, but I think everyone knows in the back of their mind that a demo tree isn't the normal process of bonsai, right? Like you don't just go and like do the entire tree and then, call it a day. So I really like this idea that Adam had of bring your trees in, let's assess them, let's talk about them, let's kind of plan out what potentially you could make with this.
So it's sort of like part critique, part group workshop?
I think so. In the communication I've had with him and the others I've had with him, I think that's where it's going. Of course, maybe we'll have a curveball and it'll be a little bit different, but I really like that idea because I think as someone who's only a few years in, the whole planning of the tree is sort of mysterious. I mean, I'm only now just kind of realizing what a cut here or there on a branch is going to reliably do. I mean, I've read about what it will reliably do, but you sort of don't believe it or know it until you experience that flush of growth. And so I think having that expert guidance to say, no, if you make that cut, this is what is going to happen. My experience tells me this, and it's going to be okay. You're not going to kill your plant or, ruin your tree. So excited about that. We also have a local bonsai artist who is, he's been practicing bonsai for 30 or 40 years. Mike Pastello, and he's going to be coming in. And I think he wasn't he 14 when he was in.
He was. I think he's younger than I am though, so it can't be 40 years. Maybe it's 30.
Well, this is like when you add a few years to your resume, and your intern has 20 years of experience. But no, Mike's a phenomenal bonsai artist, and he's though he's fairly local, he lives on the other side of the range of mountains, so he has real hot temperatures and knows all about shade cloth and things that Bernard and I just look at the clouds and say we don't need to buy that. So again, it's about bringing experience and perspective in that is different, but is also focused around shared objects, shared species, and trying to see what's possible with a change or two in growing conditions or in technique or simply just the creativity. What is possible?
So that's Julian in August, and then Adam Toth in September. And
I think September is our auction.
Oh, September's the auction. So Adam Toth in October, and Mike Pastello in November.
Yes.
All right. So
and then we have a holiday, holiday party, and then January we're kicking off with Ryan Michael Bell, who is he's just an authority on Japanese pots and perhaps other pots as well. He's just laser focused, and you show him a pot and he'll tell you where it came from, when it was made, all the history, and it's really an encyclopedic knowledge, and that should be a fun one because again, members are encouraged to bring in their pots and maybe sort of, it's like an antiques roadshow, right? You kind of find out the history and you all get excited because I think a lot of bonsai is about the history of the objects, whether it's the material or the containers or the tools. I mean, it's really it's such a process over time that the history becomes more important than I think in other hobbies or other disciplines of gardening.
Yeah. So there's, 4 professionals that you just mentioned, and out of those 4 professionals, I think 3 of them are going to be at the expo doing talks and demonstrations. So Julian actually has a tree in the show, as does Mike. Mike has an oak, and I think Julian's is a juniper. I'm not sure whether Adam has actually a tree enter under his name, but I know that he regularly works in Jonas's yard on some of Jonas's little trees. So it's very possible that his hand is actually in. It's funny because Bernard's trees that were in the 2022 Expo and the one that he has in this time, they were mostly worked on by Bernard and myself. And so even though Bernard's name is on them, sometimes the trees have multiple sort of artists involved. And I like to say that Bernard is sort of like the producer and I'm the director.
Right.
If the tree is
you got a little Warhol, workshop here where Bernard gets the name. And
that sounds like a great slate of programming for BSSF. And
well, thanks. I think we're in an area of the country where bringing in professionals is feasible financially and also just with logistically with time. And I think it's all about exposure. And if a club can't get big name professionals, I think it's important to try and get just other perspectives, from maybe another state over. It's all about bringing in new ideas and enabling a conversation and at least that's what I see the club's role as.
Now, circling back to the beginning of this whole thing, do you find that, so your role as vice president in the club, has it pushed you forward in your own bonsai practice?
That's a good question. I think the bylaws say that I'm the person who has to find the people for scheduling and then support the president in any way that's possible or necessary. I think it's certainly given me more confidence to talk to professionals that I may not have otherwise felt like I could approach, not because they're not approachable, but just because I am kind of a rookie. And, approaching these people who have decades of experience is not necessarily something that I would normally feel comfortable doing. And so I think for me, it's given myself permission to do that. And so in that sense, my own personal exposure to bonsai and to what's possible has broadened. And I think that's unquestionably helped. I can't put a finger on exactly where or how, but I just think you pick things up sort of through osmosis as you go along, and the more touch points you have with bonsai, the more interesting it becomes.
So have you had a chance yet to spend 6 hours or until your fingers are numb wiring a conifer?
Well, I have not, because I'm still working on trunks, Eric. We're working on bonsai time here. I'm not. There's no instant bonsai. At least that's what you keep telling me. So. You're still
in the first decade, so you're.
That's right.
It's foundational work.
That's right. I sweep, I water, I clip and grow.
I think in the the professionals that you're talking about, Mike having been, in various clubs for decades since he was a teenager, Julian and Adam both having apprenticed in Japan as well as worked with other professionals here in California. I think it just comes down to the number of hours that you actually put into it, where like that Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour thing. I mean, Bernard, if you had to guess, how many hours do you think you've spent wiring trees at this point?
It's definitely years of wiring. Every year is a major challenge. You have black pines. You can spend hours and hours and hours. I typically spend anywhere from 4 to 6 hours wiring one Japanese black pine at this point. So, times however many I have, 20, 25 of them. So it's always a challenge every year to see if I can get through all of them. But it's just very meditative. It's enjoyable.
Yeah, I think that skill that you have of kind of being tenacious and being like, oh, I'm on schedule. And maybe it's the scheduling skill that you're so good at.
Well, I think I mentioned to you when we got together, I definitely have too many trees. And I've got to cut back, but every year it's this challenge when when the time of year is when it's time to start wiring. Can I get through all my trees? And in the beginning, it says, well, maybe I won't get through all of them, but then I just keep pushing. So it's just, determination to do it. And I enjoy that part of it too.
David, you send me pictures from time to time. How many hours a week are you spending now on bonsai?
Well, the more I learn, the more time I'm spending, because I'm learning the things that I should be doing to the trees at different points, and I am also acquiring more material. So I don't really put an hour figure. I'm certainly far less than either of you, but it's definitely multiple hours in a week that I'll be doing something with my trees. You have to remember that most of my trees are growing projects still, so I think the work ramps up exponentially as you get into refinement and more of the design aspect, where right now if I set a trunk and I like the shape, then let's multiply the trunk girth by 10, and we'll kind of get back to it. So I'm not yet on that overwhelmedness of work, but I'm certainly setting myself up for it.
Do you find it hard to, I think I think about this sort of, the idea that you have to either do something or not do something to a tree. So there's so many times where you just need to not do something. And so, David, in the stages that you're in right now, you're talking about wiring the trunk and then just waiting for the girth to bulk up. There's still things that you have to do, but do you sometimes find yourself being like, I want to cut something off of this, or I want to tweak this wire again, or do you find that you have the patience to just wait?
I'm pretty good at letting go of it. I, for whatever reason, am really into just the process and into seeing the changes in the material. And I'm not trying to, my goal is not to get a show tree or to mimic something that I saw in a picture. It's to just experience the process of engaging with the material and then seeing what it does. And that for me is enough. Maybe I'll change it as I get more into it, but I don't think I'm killing, I don't think I'm loving a tree so much that I'm killing it. And I know that that's a common thing for rookies like me to fall into. I think I'm more playing around with, things, maybe more basic things like, how many days can I get away with not watering and pushing that out and seeing how the growth actually gets better if I don't overwater, and just things that are not anything too complex. It's just developing that confidence and understanding that it's checking the trees every day, not doing procedure X to them every day.
Yeah, you have to kind of concentrate on watering and fertilizer and health checks rather than clipping and wiring and bending.
Right, yeah. Right. So, that'll change as my material gets to a different stage. And then, who knows, in 5-10 years, I'll be complaining about my hands and wiring and, or maybe I'll just stay at this stage where I just like growing small, showy sized trees. I don't know.
Well, I think you're going to get to the point where there will be other members of the community that actually want you to take their trees. I think it takes a while, but like you listen to Bernard talking about offloading trees. I think for me, when I'm selling trees that I've been working on for a decade or longer, that the most important thing really isn't the money. It's almost like, here's my pet and just please take care of it. Mm. And so there are prices on trees, but I'm guessing that Bernard would really like to see his trees go into the hands of someone who he knows or he trusts. And I think it's something that you'll probably find as you continue on in the community, because it happened to me. And I think,
well, the thought of working on a tree, developing it for year after year after year, and then selling it to somebody who's not going to take proper care of it or continue to develop it in whatever the right way is. It's it seems like it's a real waste of people's energy and the tree's development not to find somebody who's going to carry on with the development of that tree.
Yeah. I think when like back to the club, I think one of the values in the club is like that social aspect is that as you come up in the club system and you've taken on the role of vice president, people are like, oh, this person is actually willing to do work and, see you volunteering. And so then there's this sort of progression where as people are kind of getting older and aging out of, say, large trees first, that they're saying to themselves, okay, somebody else has got to take this giant tree. But so I think you're in for some adoptions.
Well, I totally understand the idea that you don't want to just. It's not about the money when you're selling a tree.
Well,
in some cases. I mean, I don't want to, but I could only imagine working on a tree for a decade, and then seeing it a year or two later, and it's just not happy or it's dead or that just must be just incredibly disheartening.
Well, I think there's no greater reward to flip that. There's no greater reward than to have sold or passed along a tree and then have it show up at a show that you attended or, at a meeting that you're attending and see that the tree has actually gotten better.
That's a great point. And again, that's back to the history that we were talking about earlier, where it's like, that's such an important part of the process that, yeah. Well, hopefully I'll get to that one day where I'll see a tree that I started and, it went on to refinement by some other's hand.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining me. Anything else you want to add, Bernard?
No, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure doing bonsai. And, I hope these podcasts can continue the enthusiasm for doing work and joining clubs as well. The value of joining clubs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, thank you both for being willing to share your expertise, because I know I've learned so much from it. And I think that's sort of a blueprint for what others can do of, it's not just about growing your trees and keeping it all to yourself. It's about community and talking about, where else are you going to talk about these species of trees? You can't, it's not like talking about, the sports team or, something like that. So it's important to find the niche and it really helps to elevate your own understanding and practice of bonsai.
I just want to end by saying that like there's this weird thing that happens when you become a level 10 tree nerd, and that is that you start watching TV shows and you're just like, this show is supposed to be taking place in, say, Nevada, and you're seeing a bunch of like maple trees, or it's supposed to be taking place in Canada and you're seeing a bunch of like, trees from California or something like that, and you're just like, no, that's coastal California and Southern
Right.
California. That's not Canada. And like you become this like tree sleuth, tree nerd thing where you can't even appreciate television because you know more than the location people about all the trees. Anyway, all right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having us.
The music on today's podcast was brought to you by the fine folks at Blue Dot Sessions. Check them out at www.sessions.blue.